Okay. So our project was called The Effect of the COVID-19 Pandemic on the Global Economy. Our members included Kenny Patel, Aiden Yang, Anish Kokal, MJ, Ethan Motter, and myself. Our project studied a data set of countries' number of cases, deaths, GDP, HCI, etc. throughout the COVID-19 pandemic. We want to determine to what extent did the COVID-19 pandemic impact the state of the global economy. Our hypothesis is that the COVID-19 pandemic had an overall negative effect on the global economy. I'm going to pass it over to one of our members, Anish, who's going to talk about the pie chart we created.
We created a pie chart to represent the total cases by location for the entire world, with each pie slice representing the percentage of total coronavirus cases that originated in that country. We created this because it gives us a good idea of where most of the COVID cases were diagnosed. It also shows us in which countries were the least affected. We found out that more than half of the total COVID cases in the world came from four countries: the US, India, Brazil, and Russia. The reason for this is probably because these are the highest population countries in the world, therefore meaning that they would have a higher count of coronavirus cases.
Okay, thank you, Anish. Next, I'm going to pass it off to another one of our members, Matthew, who's going to talk about the bar chart we created. Matthew, if you want to take it away.
Yeah, sure. Let's see. We created a bar graph containing the names of different countries on the x-axis and the death count of said countries on the y-axis caused by the recent pandemic. The creation of this bar graph is to inform the viewers of the magnitude of damage caused by the recent pandemic. This includes the diminishing of employee numbers. With this bar graph, we could deduce that certain countries were affected the most, such as Brazil, India, or the US. This chart does not account for other determining variables, such as economical success pre-pandemic.
Okay, thank you, Matthew. Next, I'm going to pass it off to Aiden, who's going to talk about the scatter plot we created. Aiden, if you want to take it away.
All right, so we created a scatter plot with a human development index on the y-axis and the total amount of cases on the x-axis. We made this scatter plot to find out how the cases in the HDI relate to each other. The main reason we made this scatter plot was to advise how different the HDI was when the cases got higher. But as you can see, we found that the number of cases didn't really matter because HDI still went up and down.
All right, thank you, Aiden. One of the main parts about our research was actually what effect the pandemic's actually having on our economy. We calculated this by making a line plot about the days pandemic to the GDP per data. GDP is most commonly used to measure the size of an economy. We found that pandemics have heavy effects in our economies. If you look at our line graph within the first 50 days, we already saw a collapse and the GDP fell from 33,000 all the way to 29,000. Closing in 150 days, the economic GDP fell to 19,000. By this, we can conclude that pandemics heavily affect the GDP per capita, therefore hurting the economy. And here's that line graph we generated. Next, I'm going to pass it off to Ethan, who's going to talk about the geo chart that we created.
We produced a geo chart to represent the human development index of different countries during the pandemic. We did this to see how much they varied, with darker colors representing a lower HDI. We found that countries with a lower HDI were generally more affected by the pandemic than countries with higher HDIs.
All right, thank you, Ethan. Our findings support our hypothesis. Our data indicated a negative relationship between the number of days of the pandemic and the average GDP of a country, indicating that the COVID-19 pandemic had an overall negative effect on the global economy. In addition, we created a geograph showing the HDI of countries during the pandemic. The graph indicated that countries that experience overcrowding, such as India, were particularly negatively affected by the pandemic, suggested by their dark color. And that was our project, and thank you everyone for listening.